A is for Alexander Hamilton, one of the founding fathers, convinced New Yorkers to ratify the U.S. Constitution. Assistant to General George Washington.
B is for
Boston Tea Party, a political and mercantile protest by the Sons of Liberty in Boston, Massachusetts on December 16, 1773. It took place because the colonists did not want to pay tax for the British duty. As an effect, the British passed the Intolerable Acts.
C is for Constitution for the United States of America. The supreme law of the United States of America. It has 27 amendments. It was signed on September 17, 1787 by delegates to the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. D is for
D-Day. It is the day in World War II on which Allied forces invaded northern France by means of beach landings in Normandy. The Allied forces had over 1,500,000 soldiers. The Allies attacked and gained a victory for World War II in Europe. D-Day was planned by General Dwight D. Eisenhower and General Bernard Montgomery.
E is for
Elias Howe invented the first practical and successful sewing machine in 1846. It changed the world completely by transforming and revolutionizing the shoe and clothing industry and the lives of ordinary people by providing the needs to buy cheap, fashionable clothing. It made a massive difference for the time that it took to make clothes. F is for
Frederick Douglass, an American social reformer, abolitionist, orator, writer, and statesman. He is a hero because in the 1800s he was a former slave who escaped and then became one of the greatest anti-slavery leaders. He became one of the most famous intellects of his time, advising presidents and lecturing to thousands on a range of causes, women's rights, and Irish Home Rule. G is for
Gettysburg. President Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address on November 19, 1863, on the battlefield near Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It is a speech President Lincoln delivered during the American Civil War at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg. He had three main purposes: to bring the country together, to reiterate his view of the purpose of the United States, and to provide a future soul to the United States as well.
H is for Harriet Tubman, an American abolition and political activist who was born into slavery but escaped through tunnels and decided to help other slaves escape. This tunnel became known as the Underground Railroad, and she also helped the Union Army during the war, working as a spy.
I is for
Intolerable Acts. These were punitive laws passed by the British Parliament in 1774 after the Boston Tea Party. These laws were meant to punish the Massachusetts colonists for their defiance in the Tea Party protest and reaction to changes in taxation by the British to the determinant of colonial goods. Yep.
J is for
James Oglethorpe. He was a member of the Parliament as well as the founder of the colony of Georgia. As a social reformer, he hoped to resettle Britain's worthy poor in the New World, and initially focusing on those in debtors' prison. Britain's worthy poor.
K is for
King Philip's War, an armed conflict between English colonists and the American Indians of New England in the 17th century. It was the Native Americans' last major effort to drive the English colonists out of New England.
L is for
Lincoln Memorial. Abraham Lincoln was assassinated on April 14, 1865, just as the Civil War was ending. By March of 1867, Congress incorporated the Lincoln Monument Association to build a memorial to the slain 16th president.
M is for
Mayflower Compact. This was an agreement among Puritans to make a government with laws that they would obey. It had an important principle of self-government, and this was the first governing document of the Plymouth colony.
this is N. That is for
Navigation Acts. These are a series of laws passed by the British Parliament that impose restrictions on colonial trade. British economic policy was based on mercantilism, which aimed to use the American colonies to bolster British state power and finances.
O is for
Olive Branch Petition. It was a final attempt by the colonists to avoid going into war with Britain during the American Revolution. It was a document in which the colonists pledged their loyalty to the crown and asserted their rights as British citizens. The Olive Branch Petition was adopted by Congress on July 5, 1775.
P is for
Proclamation of 1763. After Britain won the 7 Years' War and gained land in North America, it issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and prohibited American colonists from settling west of the Appalachians. The Treaty of Paris, which marked the end of the French and Indian War, granted Britain a great deal of the valuable North American land.
Q is for
Quakers. They're descendant groups of Protestants who believed that all people had a direct link with God and didn't need ministers. They didn't support slavery, and they valued equality amongst men and women's leadership.
R is for
Royal colonies. These are colonies that belong to the crown. An example of a royal colony would be South Carolina. These are dependencies that are under the colonial rule.
S is for
On Samuel de Champlain. He was a French explorer hired by French merchants to find a place to build a settlement so they could receive the wealth that came from the fur trade. He had good relationships with the Native Americans, and he helped the Huron Indians defeat the who?
Iroquois. T is for
Treaty of Paris in 1738. This was a series of treaties signed at Paris that established peace between Great Britain and allied nations, Spain, and this affected North American territories. It affected it because the treaties recognized the U.S. as independence and granted them Western territory.
U is for
United States of America. It is a country of 50 states covering a vast swath of North America. The United States is the fourth largest country in the world in the area. The country embraces some of the world's largest urban concentrations, as well as some of the most extensive areas that are almost devoid of habitation.
V is for
Viceroy! This is a governor who rules as representative of a monarch. Viceroys had power in the New Peru and Spain. They were appointed by the King of Spain and the Council of the Indies from among noble Spanish families.
W is for
William Howe. He was a British commander. He ordered a frontal assault by soldiers in the middle of the day to retake the hills. During the Continental Army, he had a counterpart of George Washington.
X is for
XYZ affair. This was a French crisis briefly unifying the nation. X, Y, and Z represented the French officials. XYZ demanded humiliating terms and bribes from John Adams' envoys.
Y is for
Yellowstone National Park. It is a wilderness recreation area atop a volcanic hot spots. Yellowstone features dramatic canyons, alpine rivers, lush forests, hot springs, and gushing geysers, including its most famous, Old Faithful. It's also home to hundreds of animal species, including bears, wolves, bison, elk, and antelope.
Z is for
Zion National Park. Zion Canyon's scenic drive cuts through its main section, leading to forest trails along the Virgin River. The river flows to emerald pools, which have waterfalls and a hanging garden. Also along the river, partly through deep chasms, is Zion Narrow Wading Hike.
This concludes Lonix Production.